Hi, this is Levi. Before we get into this episode, I wanted to take a quick minute to introduce a few of the other podcasts in the WCF Podcast Network. Tom and Naomi are exploring how we interact in our ecclesial relationships in From the Platform. It's a very in-depth series that is incredibly helpful for understanding and developing compassion and better listening practices. That's From the Platform. Sam Taylor from Cleveland, Ohio, produces weekly devotionals in Pause to Consider. Think Mr. Rogers meets Fireside Chat. I love Sam's humble style and think every episode is fantastic. You can find both of those wherever you get your podcasts or on our website at wcfoundation.org. Now, here's the show.
Welcome back to A Little Faith. This is a podcast sponsored by the Williamsburg Christadelphian Foundation. A Little Faith podcast explores both the challenges and hope of living a life of faith. In this podcast, Helen interviews Rachel Adams about her experience in education and early intervention. They discuss how supporting every individual as part of a spiritual family is vital for growing our faith. Even in times of doubt and struggle, we have the Lord Jesus as our mediator.
Hi Rachel, thanks for joining us. It's really nice to kind of meet you on Zoom, and we're actually both in New Jersey, aren't we? I hope we can meet face to face this summer.
Yes, God willing, Helen, we are going to the shore this summer. Shore date. Can't get more Jersey than that.
So you were born and bred in Jersey. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I live just outside Philadelphia. We're maybe 10 minutes from downtown Philly. Grew up in New Jersey. Don't have any plans to leave. Love it. I don't know what else to say about New Jersey.
Well, you're married and you have a little girl.
Helen, you know more about my life than I am able to say. Yes.
Tell us a bit more about yourself.
I've been married for how long? I got married in 2014. So I've been married about 6 years. I have a daughter who's 18 months old. Grew up in the truth. I am a early intervention specialist. Before that, I was teaching, and I have a podcast called the Discerning Daughters podcast.
Yeah, so tell us a bit more about Discerning Daughters.
Probably about a year ago, I think it was. I was actually listening to a series of classes by Brother Mike Livermore called Classic Lessons for Modern Challenges. And one of the classes, he kind of puts it out to the audience that you can use technology in a lot of really good, helpful ways. And he named some of the Christadelphian podcasts that already existed at the time. And as a new mom, and, it's not easy to always sit there on a Sunday morning and listen to an exhortation or get out to Bible class or whatever it may be. So I found that podcast and really just listening was so helpful to my faith and just trying to get the word of God into my life. So I said, you know what, why not just do it? So I did it. So it's called Discerning Daughters. It is by no means as great and professional as A Little Faith. Yours is much better.
That's not true at all.
But I've had maybe a dozen or so episodes. I would like it to be more interactive. I've had one sister come on and do 2 episodes about anxiety and mindfulness. She is a licensed clinical social worker. So those were excellent. I just had my friend on for a recent episode about health. She's a healthcare professional. And hoping to have some more people come on in the future. We have some more things planned. So God willing, that will happen.
And if people want to listen to Discerning Daughters, how can they find your podcast?
It's available anywhere you can get your podcast. Just search Discerning Daughters. It's actually funny, Helen, because I don't love the name Discerning Daughters, but when I started it, I just needed a name. I knew what I wanted my first episode to be about. I knew kind of where I wanted to go with the podcast. The idea when I started it was in the morning, oftentimes I like to put on a devotion, a podcast, a reading, just listen to a reading kind of with my coffee. And as I'm getting the day started, I find it gets the day started on the right note. And the first title I wanted was New Every Morning. So I was like, oh, this would be such a good title. It's scriptural. My podcast is shorter than yours. They're 15 minutes. It's meant to listen to kind of in the morning or on your lunch break, your commute, whenever, a short time. So I searched it on the podcast app and it already existed. So I listened, and it was also a newer podcast. So I started listening to the first episode, and it was by Australian girls. And I was like, like they sound like they could be Christadelphian. So one of the giveaways is they said something about the truth or in the truth or something the truth. And I was like other Christians don't say that. So I emailed the podcast writer, and yeah, it turns out it was like a group of young girls from Adelaide, Australia, who were Christadelphian and literally had like just started a podcast. So that one also has been really helpful for girls. It's called New Every Morning, and they have a better name than mine. So if anyone has any suggestions, let me know. I mean, it is what it is. I don't really care. It's just the name. But
no, I really like the word discerning, because I think
it's good.
There's some depth to it there. Like we obviously go to meeting and we have a lot of interaction with each other, but when it all comes down to our personal relationship with God and reading the Bible, we have to be discerning. That's a really important part of our faith journey. So yeah, I think discernment.
Yeah, nice alliteration.
I'm a fan of that word. Anyway, tell us more about early intervention. Like, what's your job title? What do you call yourself?
So early intervention is a state-funded program for kids before their school age. That would be 3, actually, because once they're 3, the school district would take over. But it's designed for kids who have developmental delays, and that can manifest itself in a number of ways, whether it be speech and language, physical delays, cognitive delays. And my title in early intervention is a developmental intervention therapist or specialist. So I work in the homes of my kids and just help them really with any of their delays they may be having by working with the families and the kid directly to work towards whatever their goals may be.
Mm-hmm. What attracted you to early intervention?
So I had already been working with the special needs population. I was a teacher before. I worked in an inclusion preschool classroom. So inclusion is when you have special education students mixed with general education students, with the idea that really they can all learn from each other. And it was really beneficial to both of the groups of students I found, the special education students and the general education students, that they just became more aware of each other and their differences. But especially with preschool, what was so beautiful was that in the beginning, it might be like, oh, like this child's in a wheelchair, or this child has an aide with him all day. But as the weeks go on and they get more used to each other, they don't even notice anymore, and they're just all playing together. So
it's beautiful.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And so once Brian, my husband, and I were planning to start trying to have a family, I knew I didn't want to full-time teach if possible, because it takes a lot out of you. And I had coworkers who were already doing early intervention in the evenings. I got into it while I was still teaching, just a couple cases a week at night. And since having my daughter, have gone again and started doing it in the evenings and afternoons when my husband gets back from work. So yeah, it's worked out really well for us, and I'm loving it. So if I can keep doing this and not go back to teaching, then I would be very happy.
It's great. And what kind of exercises or activities do you do with children and their families when you go and visit them?
Since they're all under the age of 3, all the interventions are through play. Mm-hmm. So it could be very simple back and forth activities, like something simple as blowing bubbles and trying to have the kid make eye contact before you blow the bubble, or say pop as you're playing with them and laughing. So it's really just all about building that relationship and trust with the family and the child first. And then it's usually, most of my students are kids who have speech and language delays. Mm-hmm. So a lot of their goals are language focused.
And how are these problems identified usually?
So when a parent, or it could be a physician, suspects that a child has developmental delays, they'll refer them to early intervention. Mm-hmm. And early intervention will send out a team who will do the initial evaluation. And they'll come into your home and just play with your child. And as they're playing, they'll be taking notes and doing different simple assessments to see what the child is able or still having challenges to do. Mm-hmm. And then we'll see if they are below a certain standard deviation in the assessment, then they are eligible for services. So there's lots of services involved with early intervention. I do developmental intervention, but there's also occupational therapy and speech therapy, physical therapy. And what I do is kind of almost the foundation for which those other therapies can then go into the home, because we're working on a lot of the social emotional skills and building their attending skills to an activity, so that when these other therapists come in, they're kind of more ready for another session.
And I imagine it can be quite scary as a parent when you notice something and you're not sure what to do about your child.
Yeah, for sure. And I think my perspective on that has probably changed a little bit since becoming a parent, and just like every little thing, you're like, oh my gosh, like, what is she doing? Is she supposed to be doing that? Like, but just like the worry that you have as a parent, it's so strong, and you just want your child healthy and you want your child to be able to thrive. So when these more serious concerns come about with speech delays and cognitive delays, and why isn't my child walking yet? Why isn't my child speaking? And you just are comparing your child to all the children around. So I imagine it's quite frightening for parents. So I try to go in and really just concentrate on building a relationship with the parent, being trusting with them, with their child, so that they can see they can be comfortable around me. And we really are working together to accomplish whatever the child's goal may be.
And how do you reassure parents?
Really, I think just by teaching them some of the strategies and techniques we work with, not being judgmental to their home or how they do things, because it's so different. Every family is so different. Never comparing families, or really just reassuring them and giving them the tools they need to help their child. I think once they start utilizing different strategies and seeing them work, they get really excited and they start to feel more empowered and not so helpless. That like, oh, I can help my child too. Like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I think empowering parents and building that confidence is just essential, isn't it? Like, I mean, for all parents, in fact, like...
Absolutely.
Especially, well, new parents, if you've never parented before, like, confidence is key, just to kind of just be more reassured that you're doing a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. And you give lots of positive reinforcement and praise, like, you're doing great, like, that was beautiful the way you just said that to him and how you're supporting him, like, that's exactly what you want to do. Because I remember, even as a new mom myself, just when somebody would say to my daughter, they'd be like, oh, Emma, you're so lucky, you have such a good mama taking care of you. It's such a little thing to say, but I think we just question ourselves so much, that I was always so thankful when people would just say that and reassure me that, like, okay, like, I'm doing what I can be doing right now, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, totally. Like, it can just even be a comment in the park or a comment in the grocery store that just like where people are positive. Like, even if you're just having a moment where you're like, they're gonna kick me out of the store. Like, your child might be having a tantrum or something, and when or at the airport, or and when people can just be really reassuring,
supportive of each other.
It's so How does early intervention help families?
So really, we're kind of talking about parenting there a bit, but what I really enjoyed about early intervention was that families were the focal point of the services. So when a child enters the education system, when they're 3, if they still have developmental delays, their IEP, which is their individualized education plan, it's really going to be focused on the school setting and things that happen in the classroom. But with early intervention, it's all about things that are happening in their natural environment, which would be their home. Sometimes I'm in daycares as well, but families are really the focal point of early interventions. The Individualized Family Service Plan, the IFSP, is designed entirely with the family in mind, and the family gets to choose the goals that they have for their child. So whether they want to focus more on meal times or compliance during transitioning, simple language, building your language vocabulary up to 10 words, whatever it may be, the family really gets to have the most say, even in what services they do or do not want. And I just find it so encouraging to be working directly with families, because in the school setting, you might build a really beautiful relationship with a student, your classroom develops throughout the year. And the goal for my classroom when I was teaching full time was always just to make the students really start to care about each other. And it really started to feel like a family in my classroom by the end of the year, because they took care of each other, and they would even come in from recess and say about the other classes weren't listening, and they were picking on one of my students, and they were standing up for each other outside the classroom, which I just love. My little babies taking care of each other. And but it's kind of it was more difficult to extend that to the families. And even in the school I was in, did a lot of family engagement activities where they tried to bring the families in on weekends and nights to do different things. It was really difficult to have them directly involved with their child's education. So in contrast, early intervention is all about the family. So I get to develop these really strong relationships with the family and the child. And I think it's way more effective that way, because the interventions are taking place so much more often, and they're taking place at home. But I think it's really special as an early intervention therapist to be in the home, to start gaining that trusting relationship with the family. And it's also funny because the first few sessions you go into someone's home and you're a little scared yourself. Like I'm going into a stranger's home who I've literally never met before. And so there's already been people who've been there before, the evaluation team. So it's not like no one's been there, but it's a little scary. It's a little awkward, but you can tell the more I go, the families are getting more comfortable. And like this can manifest itself in very simple ways. Maybe like their house isn't as clean, and like they don't care if the dishwasher isn't loaded yet, or maybe they got home from work and changed into their lounge clothes as opposed to like staying in like professional clothes. So and I love it because it really starts to become that I'm becoming a part of this family as well, that they're comfortable with me here, that they can just be themselves. So I love that. I think, it's really all about the relationships.
And it's genuine. I love that it takes in account the whole family and not just the child, because I think that's so important. It's more holistic, and you can see the whole child. Whereas, of course, when you see a child just in an educational setting, you only kind of really see part of them, like part of their personality.
Well, yeah, because you think about even us as adults, we're our most true selves with the people we're the most comfortable with our families. If you had a really bad day, you might keep it all together until you get home, and then you just start sobbing just because that's where you're comfortable. So to really see people let down those walls and be a part of them, be part of kind of the other side of the wall, it's really a special experience. So I really love early intervention. So it's something I hope to be able to keep doing.
And it's really beautiful. I mean, it's made me think that with relationships, there's a vulnerability there, but then that's where we grow. You're kind of vulnerable going into the home. They're vulnerable to you, but as you get to know them and you develop those relationships, the child will flourish. The parents will feel more empowered and confident, and then you two will feel more relaxed being a part of that and being the catalyst for that, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just the parents. I have some homes where they have, a grandparent living with them as well who will become involved in the sessions, or siblings oftentimes will be involved and will practice turn taking and tolerating others within play. So it's really neat to be a part of, not just this one child's educational experience, but the whole family starts to kind of change, even in the way they talk to each other and interact with each other.
And have you got anything to reflect about your faith, especially since you've been involved in early intervention?
Yeah, for sure. I think kind of when we talked about it a few weeks ago, what teachers do really at the core is kind of pastoral work. They're taking care of people, and of course they're teaching them, but a lot of it is connected to our faith. And specifically for early intervention, and you could take it so many ways. I mean, I know for my husband, when I first started, he was quite frightened at the idea of me going into random people's houses, like rightfully so. But, I was kind of like, this is what Jesus did though. Like Christ always went into places that he was, it wouldn't have been the place that I would have gone first, the comfortable place, but he kind of went to where people needed him. And
of course,
faith lessons and scriptural lessons for sure to it, that like, even with preaching and reaching out to other people, it's never going to be something that's comfortable. And the people who need Jesus the most are going to be the people who might be the most awkward to go hang out with or say hi to or talk to. So
I looked up the word intervention in the dictionary, and the synonyms were really interesting. So here were my synonyms. They were intercession, involve, mediation, conciliation, and peacemaker. There were some others as well, but those really stuck out to me, and I'm like, whoa, they're really spiritual, those words. Like, intervention initially sounds negative, doesn't it? But it's not actually a negative thing at all. It's a helping thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny you said that, because there's that verse about Christ that talks about him being our intercessor. Yeah. So really, like, our intervention as believers, we could only be, made whole, as it were, through Christ intervening on our behalf.
Yeah, totally. And there are times where we need to intervene when we're aware that people are suffering, people are struggling, there are problems. In the small things and the big things, we have a duty to each other to look after each other and to care, that pastoral element. And yeah, I was even thinking about my children, like, do I intervene? Of course I do. They're having an argument. Sometimes I leave them to try and sort it out. But of course, people can't always sort things out by themselves, and they do need help. And that's how we're meant to help each other as a spiritual family.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a difficult pill for some to swallow, because the world is very much, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and we're both going to be good. But it's not the same for believers, because what we want for each other, our goal is to all be in the kingdom together, right? To all be trying to live like Jesus every day, which obviously we fail at. But if someone is struggling in that walk, then it's like you said, it's our responsibility to help them. Because we're all part of the body of Christ. So if there's a part of the body that's hurting, you're going to want to make it feel better, because that's your body too.
Mm-hmm. And one of the words that you used a lot when you're talking about your job was relationships. Like, relationships is so important, and building relationships. And that really applies in our spiritual walk as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Because I think you can't truly intervene or help someone in their life unless you really know them. Mm-hmm. I think the easiest way to turn off a young person, or maybe someone who's new to the truth, or even someone who is close to leaving the church, would be to, like, come at them and, I'll put it in quotes, intervene in something in their life, like call them out for something. I think that's the quickest way to turn them away and get them to leave. But on the inverse, if we're really building these relationships with people and we really know what they're going through, then they also should know a bit about what we're going through. It shouldn't be one-sided. One of my favorite verses is in Galatians, which says, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. So while you're trying to help someone carry their burden or help them through a struggle, they should already have maybe helped you through a struggle before, or already known about some things you were struggling with. So it doesn't come off as this self-righteous, oh, I think maybe we could have a chat about this. I'm not sure, this is following Christ in this way. The person will be much more willing to listen to you and have a chat with you about it if it's someone who you already have that relationship with.
So really, we need to be spending more time with each other, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the terms I've been using is trying to skip the Sunday small talk. And if you're seeing someone on a Sunday morning, really trying to engage with them, which isn't always easy as moms, right? Because we have little ones running around. But I just think it points to that it has to be so much more than Sunday mornings. And as you said in your faith talk, your home needs to be an extension of your church. And the fellowship is so much more than just that Sunday morning breaking of bread.
Yeah, so we can build those relationships and just be more aware of each other, I think, at the early stages of problems, like identifying when there are things that are wrong, or people who are unhappy or hurting. The earlier we are aware of them, the sooner we can help them and come alongside. And the same for us. We need to be more open with each other, of course, about our own problems and things we're challenged by. So that we can also allow others to help us, because it's also really hard to ask for help, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable to be vulnerable to someone and open up in that way. Yeah. But that's, like we said, that's where your faith can grow the most, when you're vulnerable with someone and honest.
I was thinking about other Bible passages or accounts where intervention happened, and I was thinking about the Good Samaritan. Actually, I thought like a really beautiful picture of making different choices of to intervene or not, and how the others just passed the wounded man by. They didn't want anything to do with him, but it was the Samaritan who stopped. He intervened. He saved that man and took him to somewhere where he could be made well again. I really liked that kind of picture of, we all have choices, don't we? Like as believers, of how we react and how we're aware to each other to either help or to not help.
Yeah, and I think even when you're choosing to help, we have to be really careful about what our motives are and our thinking behind helping, because there's that warning about, you're worried about the speck in your brother's eye, but you have a beam in your own eye. And if it's not a motivation of your love for this person and your love for Christ, then you're not doing it out of love, and you need to pray about it more, because you probably should not be intervening with whatever this person's struggle may be. But, our ultimate goal for each other as brothers and sisters is to see each other in the kingdom and to help each other there. And Paul says that seeing them is his crown of rejoicing, seeing his brothers and sisters with Jesus. That's what he can get through his trials with, by seeing that. So I think we really have to be careful about what our motive is. Are we seeing them as our crown of rejoicing? Are we seeing them as, okay, I'm going to picture this person in the kingdom, and for that reason I'm going to help them? Or are our motives maybe more ill-willed, whether it be from pride or self-righteousness, which are both really dangerous.
And fearful of our own like how we might be affected by them and not the other way around.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Have you had any intervention experiences to share from your own personal experience where someone has intervened in your life somehow to help you, which has helped your faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think loads and loads, and anyone who has a real friend, hopefully at some point has had that kind of honest talk with them. And again, I think it's our most real relationships that those happen in and that they're effective in. So definitely, I mean, with my husband, with my family, with my closest friends. It's not a regular occurrence, hopefully, but that's part of being a friend. And I love that verse in Proverbs that talks about the rebuke of a friend is better than the kisses of an enemy. And not necessarily that you have to be rebuking someone. That's kind of not the word we're looking for. But you want your friend's honesty over someone else's lies and saying, oh, it's all going to be all right. You keep doing your thing.
Totally.
And I think it kind of goes both ways. Like we were a little bit chatting about that, like you need to have good motivation if you're going to go to someone, and your motivation needs to be love. But on the inverse, if someone's coming to you with like a concern about something, or maybe notices you're struggling, it's just reaching out to making sure you're okay, trying not to assume the worst in that person, and giving our brother or sister the benefit of the doubt and saying, okay, like I don't know what their motive is, but I'm going to esteem my brother better than myself and assume that their motive is love and wanting to see me in the kingdom.
And the more empathetic we are with each other, the more we put ourselves in their situation and be open about our own weaknesses. Like it's inviting them to be open about their struggles too. And that, I think that's really important. Like we have to be an example of openness and honesty so that we can build those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to that verse in Galatians, we are not fulfilling the law of Christ if we're not bearing someone's burdens. So if someone's not bearing your burdens, you're not letting them fulfill the law of Christ either. So we really have to, like I said, skip the Sunday small talk and start really talking about things that we're struggling through, because we're all struggling through something.
And I think a lot of the time we use that expression, I feel like that too. Oh yeah, that happened to me as well. Like the more that we share those things, we realize that we have so much more in common sometimes than we think we do.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
So if we realize that something is wrong with someone in our church or ecclesia and we want to help, what are positive ways to intervene where we can help that person and open up that relationship?
Yeah, well, wow, good question. So I think for sure, as we kind of already mentioned, that you need to first consider yourself and your own motives and pray about it. That should always be really our first reaction to everything. And it's funny that like this is the episode we're talking about, because I have a lot of beams in my eye. I am on that side of the spectrum. So it's not like I'm I'm here saying like, oh, everyone needs to be rebuking each other like that. It's like not my personality at all, but it is a nice tie into what I do professionally anyway. But in the ecclesia setting, I think Matthew lays it out perfect that, the first step is you go directly to that person and talk. And so often this first step is ignored, and people instead, like, so let's say, Helen, I'm a little worried about something I saw on social media, because that seems to be like a common thing people will start, gossiping about. And rather than just going to you, Helen, I go to somebody else in my ecclesia and start talking about it. And then that person goes to someone else, and that person goes to someone else. And then it comes back to you that I started this whole thing about your social media, when you're like, that was not even whatever it was. That was not the case. And so we can skip so much of the extra drama if we just go directly to the person in a gentle and humble, non-judgmental manner, just to talk about them and tell them like, hey, I love you. Like, what's going on? Do you want to talk about it? The scriptural way is to just simply have a chat with them. Whereas all too often with technology, we're like, oh, we're going to just text them or email them. And I think there's a lot of dangers with that, because things can be read way differently. The tone can be different. And, then you can write in all your scriptural support and verses for all the reasons you're right before you've even really talked to that person to see what's going on.
Yeah, we can make way too many assumptions without talking to each other. And
so again, it's about relationships.
Yeah, and I think that really shows that we all need to improve our communication skills. Like, we need to be better at listening.
Definitely.
Opening up those conversations and learning how to be better listeners. And there's just tons in the Bible about listening and listening more than speaking.
Slow to speak, quick to hear, right?
Yeah, and that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so our ears should be kind of like working twice as hard than our mouths. And going back to your job, like, do you have any reflections about speaking and listening that, like, you think that there are connections there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I try to listen to not just the parent, but kind of, the kid. I let them kind of guide this session. So it's obviously going to look a little bit different for a nonverbal 2-year-old for me to listen, because they're not actually talking to me, but kind of just following their cues and reading their body language. I'm not going to force them to do things that I know they're not ready for. I'm going to kind of like let them steer the session and the way it goes.
We don't always tune into body language enough. I think there's definitely part of building relationships here is about being more aware. So how can we be more aware? We can definitely talk to each other more. We can need to listen more, and we need to read each other.
Yeah, for sure.
Those cues, those hints. And sometimes it's when people don't say stuff, isn't it? Like, it's the silences, it's the eyes looking away, people feeling like they can't talk. So giving people more opportunities that they can share things with you.
Yeah, for sure.
We're in such an interesting time at the moment where we're not seeing each other physically face to face, and we're not touching each other, we're not hugging, we're not embracing, we're not holding people's hands. I mean, even things like that, when we're listening, it can just be placing your hand on top of someone else's, that can be like just that reassurance to say, yeah, I'm here, I'm listening.
Yeah, you think of Job and his friends, and that they literally just sat there with him, and that was all he needed them to do. And sometimes that's all we need to do. We don't need to share. We can just sit, just be together. But obviously not right now, only on Zoom calls. No, it's not the same, but
like sitting and listening. Like, that's where we really need to start with building our relationships. We need to be sitting and listening to Jesus. We need to be sitting and listening to God, and we need to be sitting and listening to each other, and that's how we're going to grow. Is there anything else you wanted to say about growth and development?
Every child develops differently. So the developmental continuum is the same, kind of the process of which, okay, first you're going to start crawling, and then you'll start taking a couple steps, then you'll start walking. All of it is the same. It's the same progression, but the amount of time that we take on each step is different. And I think it's the same for us in our discipleship, in our lives as believers, that we all have the same destination in mind, right? We all want to be there with Jesus in the kingdom, but we're all going to have different ways of getting there. And just because someone else may be on a different level, a different path than you to get there, it doesn't mean they're not going to get there. And it doesn't mean that they have any less faith than you, or on the opposite, maybe more faith than you, because sometimes you can doubt yourself in that way as well. But with Christ, he can intervene at all the stages and help us all get to where we need to be.
Yeah, I really loved also where you talked about it's about the family and not just the child. And then the spiritual message there, it's about all of us and not just particular individuals and their struggles. We're all in this together. We're all interconnected as a body in Christ. And that's so important to remember.
Yeah.
How do you think God intervenes in our lives?
So we kind of said this in the beginning, but I think Christ is our ultimate intervention, right? Because like you said, one of the synonyms for intervention is intercession. And it tells us in Hebrews that Christ ever lives to make intercession for us. And I think, like you were saying, with growing and developing, our ability to listen and build relationships involves kind of just sitting sometimes, even just sitting and reflecting on our own lives. I think in hindsight, we can see times in our walk where Christ really came in and intervened in our life. And whether it was an answered prayer or carrying us through a trial, or even guiding our path away from something that, looking back in hindsight, we're like, oh, wow, I'm so glad I didn't do that. Whatever it may be, we can see that Christ has been active in our life. And I don't think it's just Christ, it's also the angels are here always working for us. And I think it's always really exciting when you remember the angels, because oftentimes like it's just not something I think about a lot. But again, in Hebrews, it says that they are ministering spirits sent to help us. All of these people who are on our side, well, I shouldn't say people, but like the angels and Christ and God. And like you were saying, like it's all about each other and your family. So we have so much support. And I think just kind of by reflecting upon that and remembering we're not in this alone, we can really kind of have the faith to start enduring to the end. And it kind of reminds me a bit of when Elisha said to his servant not to be afraid, because there are more for us than there are against us. And then he opens his eyes and like he literally sees all of the angels and the chariots and the horsemen, and it's like, oh wow. And if we take time to kind of see past the temporal things to the eternal things, we'll know that we have all of these things on our side too, because God loves us and he cares for us and he wants us to be in the kingdom. So yeah, I think just like pausing and breathing and remembering that we have that help through God.
Yeah, and even in the tough times, we can't always see it, but a lot of the time we can see when we reflect back that God was there, and he was guiding us, he was holding us, and that even I think in the tough times when we don't feel like we have much faith, that we can lean on each other, and that our brothers and sisters in our spiritual family can hold us too and help us, and we must always remember that.